Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, I'm back with my friend Houman Shahidi, CEO of EV Passport. If you don't know them, they recently raised $200 million to support their growth. Last year they delivered 10 million miles worth of energy. I just found out today, and a good friend. This is so fun to do the Between Two Plugs mini series together. Why don't you tell people about our great guest?
We're so lucky to have Joe Moye, who's the CEO of Beep. But Joe's experience comes from a really diverse background, from big implementation partners to driving change within the digital transformation in the higher ed space and beyond, to now tackling what I call the most important frontier in mobility, which is autonomous shared vehicles and managing the fleets and the technology experience associated with that. Joe, you come to us with a wealth of experience. So excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Hu and Jess, thanks for having me, and look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Joe, let's start with, a little bit of a look back, right? I mean, when I really take a peek at your amazing career, you started not really, you didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be the CEO of an autonomous vehicle and company. Tell us about your background and your upbringing.
Yeah, so, first and foremost, I started in the technology field right out of school. So I won't say how long ago that was, but we'll say, multiple decades. And, had the real good fortune of moving into many different aspects of technology. So started back in the big iron days of mainframe computing and got into the early stages of open systems computing, moved into the services, IT services related sector and software. So I've had kind of a blessed opportunity to span all aspects of implementing technology to support businesses and governments and other entities. And about 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to explore the entrepreneurial world. Started my first company in the business analytics arena, was able to successfully build that, and I ultimately sold it to a group that became partners with for the last 2 decades. And we created our own venture capital group and ultimately founded Beep 6 years ago. And really, as technology entrepreneurs, we quickly realized that there was a unique need in the arena of public transit in particular for autonomous technologies, and so built the company from brick one, and have since advanced to support 9 or 40 clients across 9 states, and have got some pretty exciting news on some new OEM partners and technology that's really going to enable us to go through a hyperscale phase in the next couple of years.
That's amazing. So tell us about how your journey from your first role in the technology space to everything you've done in between arrived you at being at the helms of Beep, and what are some of the best practices you reflect on that are implemented on a daily basis at Beep?
Yeah, no, happy to address that. And as I look back on my career, I mean, I started as a bag carrying sales rep, and so I think that client facing, market facing side of business leadership is something that I always have gravitated towards and always will. And that's, I think, been an important component of how my journey has played out. And as I look at Beep, and frankly that transition from corporate America into the entrepreneurial world, one of the things I quickly figured out or ascertained is that startups aren't for everybody. It's a different fabric, as you know, with your own company. I'm sure it's a different fabric of individual, and the being a multifaceted skill set of kind of doing what the day calls for when you're building a business, especially from brick one. And as I kind of look back on best practices, and it's an interesting phrase I use with anybody that I ever interview with or is interested in joining one of our companies. I always tell them that I've seen great people fail in entrepreneurial environments. And that doesn't mean, certain people are better than others. It's just a different, level of commitment and as I used the term multifaceted a minute ago, it is, being able to be a jack of all trades at points in time when that's needed. And so I think finding the right mix of talent at all levels that have that ambition, have that drive, have that ability to, be the Swiss Army knife, if you will, has certainly been something that's I think been an important element of a lot of our companies and teams that we've built.
Fascinating. So you talk about team building. How has building a great team, shifted over the years, right? I mean, you've led some really amazing organizations, Capgemini, Blackwood, so on and so forth. How has the dynamics of the team and the values shifted over time?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, you don't have to look too far in our past here to have seen this shift to the virtual world of tools like we're on now kind of being the predominant form of meeting people. And I think it's been an interesting challenge for businesses like ours that are very customer facing, where you can't negotiate important multi-million-dollar long-term commitments to transforming mobility in the case of what we do at Beep over, a Zoom call or a Teams call. And so, the ability to kind of balance bringing teams together, yes, certainly leveraging the virtual world that we live in to acquire talent and serve the realities of the workforce of today, but also creating an environment where you still can have that personal touch and be able to, frankly, sit around a conference room table and troubleshoot and solve for business issues. And so, yeah, I'd say I think, in my experience, that's one of the things that has probably been the biggest transformation that we've had to go through to get the level of productivity you want.
So, let's kind of pivot towards the future a little bit. What does, mobility look like moving forward, from your perspective, from Beep's perspective?
Yeah, from Beep's perspective, and we are in the business of deploying, shared electric autonomous platforms. And when I talk about shared, we're talking about, multi-passenger form factors of 10 to 15 passengers, and in very specific use cases. So if you think about downtown urban areas and first mile, last mile connectivity, or campus environments, or airport type shuttle scenarios. We're very specifically in that arena for a couple of reasons. One is there's use cases there that can be adopted in these more controlled speed, geo-fenced environments where the technology operates, quite successfully today and is advancing much more rapidly than the more complex use cases. So, kind of being first and foremost serving that sector, I think it's been a critical piece. And I just completely lost my train of thought. And I was told I could do this. You had a question that I wasn't answering, and I hate when politicians do that. So I'm going to go back and stop.
That's okay. It's more about, my question was around how mobility is shifted, right? And what Beef's view is, but also like what your view is, right? I mean, how do you, sometimes, like I'm in the mobility space myself, right? Like, so we have this corporate view, but like we have to balance that with the realities of, the world and society, right? Because in so many ways, EV Passport, Beep, I consider us business to society companies more than anything else.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And I think if you look at the societal impact of what we're trying to do as it relates to shared mobility, one is it's providing new accessible platforms for people that lack alternatives as an alternative to your personal vehicle. I mean, something we feel very passionate about is we got to change the way we move people in our society, not just replace a driven vehicle with an autonomous vehicle. We need to take cars off the roadways. We need to have smart infrastructure that can truly, reduce accidents and fatalities. 40,000 people perish on our roadways every year in the U.S. So I think that societal impact is an important component of it. And what we do in shared mobility solutions is exactly what I said. Take cars off the roadway. For every full shuttle I can use in a planned community or a downtown urban area, I'm taking 8.5 cars off the roadway. And whether that is your drive to reduce carbon emissions, whether that's reducing traffic congestion, whether that's providing new accessible solutions for our citizens, it's incredibly impactful. And frankly, what drives a lot of what we do in the use of these technologies.
And so tell me about Beep's customers, right? I mean, I'd love to kind of learn more about how there is overlap, because I always believe that, because of the digital transformation that's happening in our world today, right? And every company being arguably a technology company, the diversity of customers has never been greater for the enterprise. And you know that better than anyone else, given the great impact that you've delivered at the many different enterprises. Would you say that that's true of Beep as well?
Yeah, I very much believe that to be the case. And we're fortunate to, and it's been a great personal experience as it relates to some of the things that I've been able to learn in this industry, but also in some of the areas we've been able to have real impact. And I look at where we started in a planned community, Lake Nona, Florida, which is about an 18 square mile community. And although a private community, they're generating tens of thousands of jobs that, wasn't easy to get to the area and then access those jobs. So it's not just about moving people around the community. It's about providing transportation, convenient, safe transportation for visitors and businesses and people seeking the goods and services and job opportunities in those areas. And so that's a great example of a use case where it's a controlled speed environment. You're operating on posted speeds of 35 miles an hour or less. You're providing really meaningful connectivity across the community where you can leave your car at home or not bring a rental car if you're visiting there. But that was kind of the starting point, and we've since moved to work with a lot of public transit authorities, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, Contra Costa out in your neck of the woods there, Jess, or your old neck of the woods, out in the East Bay area, where these transit authorities are trying to extend microtransit solutions. Today, a lot of 40-foot buses can get you across town, but you don't have these arterial routes and services. So really being able to extend accessibility and mobility in downtown urban areas has been another critical component. And then, think of campuses. And I think probably two of the most proud implementations we've had, been at VA campuses in California and Florida, where we're providing transportation, for vets that are seeking services at these hospitals, whether that's connecting remote parking or, providing transportation from a local hotel. Probably one of the most fascinating implementations we had was at Yellowstone National Park, where it was a short-term pilot, but the national parks were really exploring how could they provide autonomous electric platforms for their future. And if you've ever been to our national parks, the congestion and the challenges you have with small roadways and things of that nature really make them a perfect example of where you want to keep cars off the road. And we in a few month pilot moved 10,000 people just from one remote camping area to the Welcome Center, which is kind of the center of the universe at Yellowstone. And so it's been, those learnings and those experiences in so many different diverse use cases that you don't always think about in the area of microtransit that have really kind of helped inform what we're going to be doing with these next generation vehicles that we'll be deploying in the next couple of years.
For sure. Lake Nona is a project I'm actually pretty familiar with. Now, let's double click into that, because do you think we're going to see more of those types of communities around the country? And, when we think about, the business yield, the community yield it brings, is this something that you think the general public and other parts of the nation are going to gravitate towards?
Yeah, I very much do. I mean, you look at it now, and I mean, we all talk about this, but it used to be when you turned 16 years old, you were waiting in line at 4 a.m. to get your driver's license, right? I know that was my case. And you look at it today, and kids are looking for alternative solutions to get from here to there. Obviously, Uber and Lyft and the whole ride-hailing arena has changed the way people think about needing their own personal transportation. So I think there's a lot of drive and momentum and reasons why we've got to address kind of the unique attributes of the next generation, and these types of solutions are an important piece of that. You look at an area like Lake Nona, and yes, they're a planned development, 18 square mile facility, but they have everything from hospitals to business centers to residential to major sporting venues and arts venues. And so, it is a self-encased community. And, one, they utilize offering these electric, high technology, autonomous services as a bit of a brand, part of their brand, where they believe in innovation and they believe in technology. And that's part of the theme that they've created to attract businesses there, residents there, visitors there. And then you look at the economic side of it. A vertical structure parking garage costs about $35,000 a parking space to build. And if a developer can justify and rationalize eliminating parking requirements, that's land that can be reused for other purposes in a community. And it's an incredible expense reduction, capital expense reduction. So there's a lot of things that drive, yes, the operating costs are much lower, but there's a lot of things I think that are driving both private communities and public communities and services to really consider, the future with these types of platforms.
That's really interesting. Jess, you're no stranger to building communities. I mean, you've served in many capacities, including as a developer. I'll pass it on to you. I'm sure you have some great questions.
Yeah, I am anxious to ask some of them, but before we do that, Joe, can you give people some stats? What are like some of the most impressive numbers around the company, of whether it's miles driven or funds raised or anything like that? Give people a scope.
Yeah, no. So just to give you a scope, we are a venture-backed company. We've raised about $90 million in capital to date. We are our own venture capital firm. A number of us are partners of, the founding group that started Beep. So, it's we're very selfish investors. We take the capital that's needed and don't subscribe to the build it and they will come model. So we have been focused on, customers and partners from day one. I mentioned, the company is headquartered in Lake Nona, Florida, and our first partnership was there with Orlando and Lake Nona as a starting point. So we've had, as I mentioned before, 40 of these programs piloted across 9 different states now, as far west as Hawaii and up and down the East Coast. We're about 130 employees now. Starting from 3 of us a few short years ago. But I would say most exciting is, yes, we've had a lot of success in working with clients to prove out the use cases that I've described in this cast. But to us, the next 2 years is really going to be a step change in both the types of vehicles that are going to come to market in a new OEM partnership we've recently announced, where the autonomous technologies are themselves, and then whereas we as a business provide our own technology to provide the service layer of that, if you will. You got a vehicle, you got the automated driver, and then you got to provision a service and ensure you can monitor for safety and continuity of service and deliver on-time vehicles at stops and things of that nature. And so, the next 2 years, to put it in perspective, I mean, we're going to go from a little bit north of 100 team members today, to several hundred in a couple of years from now. And that's really going to be the advent of going from tens of vehicles under management to many hundreds and thousands of vehicles in the next handful of years.
Wow, that's so exciting. To whose point about like development and real estate, our commercial real estate fund, one of the things we're most excited about right now is buying great second homes in, the luxury second home market, whether that's out here by Park City by me, or you brought up Hawaii, or, any of these kind of communities, right? And instead of, people owning a second home, using it 5 weeks a year, which is the average, like, hey, maybe 8 families can own it together and everybody gets it for a couple months, this kind of stuff, buy a portion of it. But traffic sucks. Like in Park City on a big powder day, like it is a pain to get around here. And like, I know that's the same for a lot of the mountain towns. We're my kids are really into surfing with me, right? And like North Shore Oahu can be like, it can take a while. Like you can probably walk faster a lot of times, right? And like the places that humans really want to be have this issue. And then, stinky diesel trucks and it's loud and all this kind of stuff. And like from a luxury experience standpoint, this idea of quiet, electric, easy, get on, get off. I could let my teenagers go. It does seem really attractive. Thinking about adoption rates and a lot of these destination communities are really embracing electric and have looked at autonomous. I used to own a consulting firm, in the $8 billion Utah Transit Authority was a client of mine for years, and I remember having sessions with the CEO and talking about literally this subject 7-8 years ago now. And they're super interested. They didn't quite know how to get to it. There was these hurdles. So when you take, whether it's a community or whether it's a private community or a city that's like, wow, we could really, really use this, whether, again, for multiple reasons you said, maybe it's the environmental, maybe it's the congestion, maybe it's these different things. What does that look like? Helping people go from good intentions to implementation?
Yeah, so a couple things you hit on that I'd like to comment on. One is, and I said this earlier and it's worth repeating, we got to change the way people move in our society if we're ever going to eliminate the road congestion that you just described. You look at some of the areas in Europe where they've started to close down certain, areas to personal transportation, making them more walkable, but also, not everybody can walk 1.5 miles. And so I think some combination of these shared electric platforms providing the connectivity people need in examples like you described. If we don't take on something like that, we're never going to eliminate traffic congestion or reduce traffic congestion. And that's why we are so focused on these shared form factors is, I would argue robo-taxi, fantastic technology, everything that happens in this arena advances all of us. So I'm not knocking that sector of the market, but replacing a driven car with an autonomous car doesn't remove road congestion. It trades one vehicle out for another. And so I think these micro transit, arterial services that we've got to build across our country and in urban areas and rural areas and vacation spots, you name it, is going to be a critical piece of our future. How do you go from, with one of the client examples from start to finish with one of these programs? What we've been doing the last handful of years is really piloting and testing with a lot of those transit authorities and cities and private communities that have wanted to push the envelope on what would this look like. And so being able to test vehicles in very slow environments, 13 to 15 miles an hour, which limits the types of services you can provide, but it introduces people to the technology, the level of adoption and comfort quickly grows. And so, we've been doing that very intentionally to inform the design, engineering, and ultimately manufacturing of these next-gen platforms. But before people deploy them, you have to have a service plan, to reference whose industry. You've got to have an infrastructure plan, whether that's your charging infrastructure or your smart infrastructure on the roadway. So a lot of the planning work that's been going on in, areas like the Jacksonville Transportation Authority I mentioned before, they've been working on their program for 8 years. And we're going to be deploying the first fleet of vehicles in downtown Jacksonville next summer. And so a lot of the kind of planning and design and readiness efforts, community engagement efforts, are really critical piece of this. And then we've got to deliver the technology that can be performant in these use cases. And that's, what we're bringing to market here, with a tier one German automotive partner, Holon and Benteler, and then with our partnership with Mobileye, one of the Intel companies that specializes in the autonomous drive systems.
Yeah, it's incredible. I want to actually kind of ask you the same question. There's these huge real estate owners that are looking to put in more chargers, and maybe they like your model better where they can make some money from it. But I don't know, guys, I know we all started careers at different times, but I got my first sales job as a 15-year-old in 1995, okay? And I feel like I've been a sales guy for 30 years, even CEO of my own investment fund, I'm just top sales guy, right? And I definitely feel like there's a lot more death by committee these days. I remember there used to be a lot more if you get the decision maker on board, you got a check written. And I don't know if you guys feel this way, but the hand wringing on nobody wants to make a mistake and get blamed has turned into a lot of let's have a meeting about a meeting so we can plan a meeting. What about you? How are you helping people get past death committee and deliver on good intentions?
Yeah, I think for us, it's, it comes down to spending time making decisions in meetings, right? I think back to my leadership meetings, right? With my executive team, we have a document where everyone kind of, shares their updates and reports in advance of the meeting. And what we really focus our time on is really making decisions. What are the blockers? How do we solve problems? Because, it all comes down to a problem well stated is a problem half solved, right? So the idea is to articulate what the problem is before you get to that meeting, so that you can be most effective. And I think, it's sort of tough to not have bureaucracy as you scale and as you grow in your organization, because you want effective governance, right? But the balance is going to be, how do you maximize productivity, efficiency while maintaining great controls, right? And that's always the challenge. And I think that's really where it comes down to two things, right? Being direct in what you want, and also being comfortable saying no, right? A lot of times people want to please everyone in terms of time. We actually are now starting to roll out a particular policy where, one-on-ones are optional, right? In Q4, you don't need to have a one-on-one because everyone's focused on delivering, your end of the year objectives, driving those last quarter results, right? Candidly, we don't have time for one-on-ones, right? It's, if there's something that's specific that comes up, that's fine. We'll deal with it. We'll react to it. But it's really focused around how do we get the corporate KPIs in a good spot. So I think, that's a piece of it. And then lastly, trust, right? You have to trust your team. Leaders eat last for a reason, because, you believe that everyone else is selfless enough to deliver on those objectives.
Yeah. Well, I know you've got a bunch more questions for Joe. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Joe, I guess, I want to pivot towards geography a little bit, right? Because, when I think about technology, mobility, and things like that, and it looks like you've been everywhere in your career. How is Florida as a place to build a technology company and mobility company? I mean, obviously, where you guys are unique in sort of the community that is a great customer. But, how does that play a role in attracting talent and building a brand?
Yeah, I think it plays a really important role. I would say, we've got a pretty dispersed workforce. A lot of our R&D and technology talent is in Atlanta versus Orlando, and that was just, where we had a concentration of hiring. But I'll say, in our case, it wasn't an accident that we started in Florida. One, we did have a relationship and a partnership, with one of our founders and, the folks there at Lake Nona. Tavistock Development Company, as well as with a lot of the public officials in the area and in the state. I'll also say that Florida has been incredibly advanced on the regulatory front as it relates to really pushing the envelope on the testing of these types of platforms, including providing some state level funding to prove out the impact of what we do and what other autonomous platforms can do and impact. And then third, and although we're dealing with the tragic aftermath of a couple of hurricanes, the weather plays a role in what we do in autonomous technology. And having an environment that is a good initiation point for the use of autonomous vehicles was critical as well. And nothing against our friends up north, but you're not going to start in a heavy snowstorm deploying autonomous vehicles, in my humble opinion. And so that played a role in it as well. But I would say certainly the business environment, the climate itself, because of the type of technology we do, there is a lot of good talent in that area with the aerospace industry in particular, and a lot of what they do at the Space Center and elsewhere. So there's been a good concentration of engineering type talent that has come there as well. But also the friendly regulatory piece was critical, because it's not the case in every state that you can do the level of testing that we've been able to do.
And let's talk about regulatory. Obviously, you spent some time in Washington, and in the public sector, and serving as a leader in that space. Representing the private sector at Capgemini. How is public sector part of kind of your growth strategy, and and how does it play a role in where you see this space going, and also just business in general? I always believe that befriending a relationship with Uncle Sam is always a good idea, because they're arguably the best customer in the world.
Yeah, no, and I'd say there's several dimensions of the public sector that are important to what we do today and what we're going to do in the future. First, back to the regulatory side of it, US DOT and NHTSA in particular govern, the safety requirements for every vehicle that goes on a US roadway. And so, interestingly enough, our federal motor vehicle safety standards are many decades old, although they've certainly been added to and revised, but they don't take into account technology. So in an autonomous vehicle, I don't need a steering wheel. I don't need a driver cockpit. I don't need a brake pedal. I don't need rear view mirrors. Yet to operate safely on our roadways today, you have to have those. So there's a process that we have had to go through working closely with DOT, and one, proving out the safety of these vehicles, but then two is, getting exempted from non-applicable safety standards. The vehicle would still pass, obviously, the most important things like crash worthiness and restraint systems and things that are most critical to safety. But in an undriven platform, you have to exempt things that aren't applicable. So that is, and that sounds a hell of a lot easier than it is to do, but that's been a big climb for us. To your point, public transit at all levels across our country is highly subsidized at the federal level. The Federal Transit Administration, provides funding for buses and services and accessible platforms. And that's an important piece of the equation to be able to service public transit, whether that's with a municipality or with a transit authority, just like you mentioned there in Utah. And so, having those relationships at the federal level, supporting these types of platforms, knowing that they're going to be deployed with the use of their funds that have some very specific obligations to them, like Buy America compliance, like the safety standards, like certain testing that you have to do for public transit vehicles. It is the biggest market in the world for what we do, the public transit market specifically. But those relationships and obviously the work that we're doing to get the regulatory approvals kind of spans everything from the federal down to the local government arena, but a really important market for us.
Now, how do you see the regulatory policy playing a role in all of this, right? Like, I mean, I think that's a big part of this is how that plays an impact. Where do you see some of the headwinds coming from there?
Yeah, I mean the headwinds are in a lot of areas. I mean, the first is to be able to adopt and ultimately deploy these vehicles at scale. You have to meet all the federal motor vehicle safety standards, and so driving today, regulatory exemptions or waivers to those processes is the path that is available. In the near term. Ultimately, there's got to be legislative action to modify our standards to take into account this new wave of technology, and that will happen. But that's a big effort. And when you're thinking about manufacturing a vehicle in this space, and the best you can do is get a temporary waiver from the government, it doesn't bode well for a lot of investment in this area and in this country. And that's been a big hurdle for us, a big headwind for us. And so we had to work in bringing this OEM partner I referenced, Benteler from Germany. They're going to be building a manufacturing facility. In 2 years' time, it'll be producing vehicles in Northeast Florida. But the government had to play a role in that process, providing the incentives and the interest for those companies to come here, and the assurances that there would be a fair treatment of the regulatory considerations. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to ultimately modify, at a legislative action, the code and the law as it relates to what these vehicles represent. And that's a continuous climb for us, and why I spend a lot of time in Washington personally.
That's great. I'm a big fan of Washington for a variety of reasons. Let's pivot towards what's coming around the corner in less than 30 days. The election. There could be a change at the helms of 1600 Pennsylvania. How do you think that plays a role for your business, and where do you think things are going to shake out?
I tell you what, and this may sound naive, but I don't believe it is. One, we when we started the business, Secretary Chow was over USDOT. Now, obviously, Secretary Buttigieg.
Yep.
And we did not lose any momentum in what we were doing in an administration change. When you talk about the importance of safety and saving lives and reducing the fatalities that we experience on our roadways every day, there is a lot of motivation to figure out how we can use these platforms to make our roadways safer. But as we talked earlier about the societal impact, when you're talking about providing new transportation and improving the quality of life for the disabled or the elderly that don't have other alternatives, when you're talking about truly being able to impact carbon emissions in a compounding way by taking multiple vehicles off the roadway. We talked about roadway congestion, providing more micro transit solutions to access jobs and health services. It's tough to say that those are one party issues. Those are things our country cares about, and I've found in the work that we've done up there, especially in some of the lobbying that we've had to do across Congress, there's tremendous bipartisan support for what this represents. Any administration change comes with delays and things of that nature, so I'm not suggesting it's just this nice little seamless transfer that will never happen. Even there's going to be a transition regardless of who wins the election, but we are really bullish on the fact that what is represented as far as societal impact of these platforms is not going to be delayed or deferred with an administration change. If anything, it will continue to be escalated.
And it's so interesting you bring up Secretary Chow because she's obviously married to Mitch McConnell. Has historically a little bit of a staunch opponent to electrification. So I want to give it back to Jess. Obviously, Washington is a new landscape for Jess and I. Most recently, we hosted a great dinner not too long ago with some really interesting people. Jess, over to you. If you want to dig deeper on this topic or switch.
Yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot of topics. I want to go a little more personal, Joe. When you think about, well, for starters, if people want to follow you guys, what's the website? What's your social media? Where are the best places?
Yeah, best place is ridebeep.com, and all of our social links are right there on the front page. So would encourage you to check us out. And we've got great overview of a lot of the use cases I've talked about, and I think it gives you a good sense of where this technology is today. So that'd be the simplest place to start.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that want to influence, like, let's talk about Washington, like who said. There's a lot of people who would like to be influential in Washington. And from what I can tell, there's a lot of showing up and treating politicians and aides and staffers almost like walking ATM machine of, let me tell you what you can do for me, right? And with a thin veneer of, how are you today? But there's a lot of take. Who's obviously much more connected to Washington than I am. At our AI dinner, we had, I think 3 different congressmen come, and we got a chance to spend some time with them. And it seems like there's not a lot of people who actually care about them as a person and are trying to dial into them at a personal level. There's a lot of people who are here for a handout and can't Uncle Sam send some money my way or things like that. And you've just got a kind of a calmness about you. And my guess is that the reason some of these things have worked in Congress is you personally and how you've personally shown up in your lobbying, working with elected officials. Can you just tell us about anything about your strategy about being successful, influencing government that doesn't have to do it your way?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that kind comment. I don't know that my wife would agree with you, but it's this some of the stereotypes, I'm sorry, in DC are fair and real. There is a lot of, very well-intended and driven people, in Congress and in the administration and in DOT. And so, and I think what you hit on is important, and that is, we got to work together, and you got to personalize this a little bit. And I will tell you, I think one of the things, whether it was brilliant strategy or blind luck, but when we started the company, one, we're up there, yes, quote unquote, lobbying, but, we're an early stage company, a venture backed company. We're not a tier one automotive that has, an army of lobbyists and support people. And so, we did it the old fashioned way, and that was developing relationships within the Department of Transportation and within NHTSA, where we were very transparent. Anytime these vehicles have a hiccup, anytime we learn something, anytime we think there's something in the technology that needs to be improved upon, we kind of did our own recalls, and so I think that information flow and that transparency, especially in this area of technology, is so critical. And I believe that cross industry, because this is such an important technology, and everything that's being learned across the many millions of miles of autonomous driving that's going on out there in various use cases. Everybody is learning things that others can benefit from. And I don't want to get too warm and fuzzy about it. We're all out there driving businesses and competing and doing all the things we've got to do to succeed. But I think collaboration is critical with everything that we do with Congress, everything we do within the Department of Transportation and the administration as a whole. And I think seeking some real bipartisan, appreciation for the impact of these platforms, is been an important piece of our success. Who would you speak to that doesn't want to save lives, that doesn't want to reduce injuries, that doesn't want to provide more transportation options to people that lack those in our country? This isn't a an R or a D issue. And so that education and, developing some level of personalized relationship where people do trust what you're telling them, and you're helping them come along in their knowledge of, what this represents. I think that is an important piece of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a great place to stop. I mean, congratulations on raising your 90 million, having all these successes, and like really having this platform. Like, we're going to have you back. Like these numbers you're talking about that's coming down the pipe. Like we want to hear from today. We want to hear from what it's like to get to there. So this has been super fun. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's great to meet both of you. Appreciate all you're doing out there to impact industry across the board. So thanks for having me.
You bet. Bye, everyone.